Look out! The brake van was in smithereens. Percy's driver and fireman had jumped clear, but Percy was stranded.
Percy's Predicament was one of those episodes that stuck out to me when I was a kid. One, because this episode managed to be amazing without even featuring Thomas in it, and two, the situation and, of course, Crash. Yeah, also fucking classics. As I'm sure you could tell clicking on this video, Percy's Predicament is one of those episodes that shares a real-life basis, or at least is inspired by real-life events. In Thomas's absence, Daisy is brought to the branch line to help Percy and Toby. She ends up leaving some tankers of milk in the yard, which annoys Percy. Since they were left, Percy has to take an extra trip and go out of his way to deliver them. However, seeing how frustrated Percy is, Toby interjects and offers to take the tankers for him. The only stipulation being Percy has to take Toby's trucks. And he's like, fuck yeah, I'll take your trucks. And Percy sets off to the mine to collect them. However, when Percy arrives at the mine, he treats the trucks very poorly. He bumps and orders them around, and the trucks decide to make a plan. Collectively, the trucks agree to pay Percy back. Percy arranges his train, and as he's leaving, everything seems well. However, as trucks do, they end up pushing Percy. Because of this, Percy's not able to brake and enters the yard going much too fast. Going so fast that the signalman wouldn't be able to direct him into a siding. Percy would then fly into the yard and run into the back of a brake van, not only destroying it, but ending up on top of it, where Percy would then sit elevated above the rails. And that is how you make a flat car on the island of fucking Sodor. Apparently this happens the next day, but eventually Toby and Daisy show up to help Percy. Naturally, Sir Topham Hatt does too to give Percy a good old scolding, and explains to Percy that he needs to be more careful before sending him off to be repaired. Of course, Sir Topham Hatt would also have a word with Daisy explaining that she needed to stop being so fucking lazy, but says he'll give her another chance and everything ends up pretty okay. We even get to see Thomas return to the branch line at the end of the episode. We also were treated to Toby hauling Percy away in his very sorry state. I told you that's how they make flatbeds. And save for Percy, everything ends up being pretty okay. While nothing that happened in this episode, at least to me, seemed too far-fetched, what ended up surprising me about the inspiration for this episode was how close the inspiration was to the actual episode. The entire wreck in the episode basically plays out the same way in real life. So much so that even just the picture of the wreck was just like, wow, that's the exact same thing. And while there's not much to the story, it's definitely still a funny one. Not only that, but how identical the events actually are is, to me, pretty crazy. And that's the beauty of these classic fucking Thomas episodes. And with all that being said, let's jump into the true story of Percy's Predicament. The image you're seeing here is originally from an old sketchbook notebook belonging to a man named Dompier Shaw, a one-time chief draughtsman at the works of London, Chatham and Dover Railway. He would supply this image with the caption, "Accident near Farnham Junction, April 13th, 1876. Engine mounted itself on goods trucks." Apparently, and as shown here, there was an end-on collision between two goods trains. The brake van of the stationary train, much like how seen in Percy's Predicament, would collapse. The engine of the colliding train would be urged forward by the weight of the trucks behind it. The engine would climb over the wreckage and come to rest bolt upright on top of two coal trucks. The engine being LCDR number 123, a double-framed 060 Class H goods engine. Funnily enough, the engine itself was nicknamed Phyllis. Unfortunately, past this, not much is known about the accident, or at least, personally, I wasn't able to find a whole bunch of information on this accident. We don't know if the brake van in which the engine would hit would be vacant, or if the driver and fireman would end up jumping clear, though presumably everything seems to be alright, at least from what you can tell in the picture, which really isn't a lot. Really, all this image tells you is somebody probably got fired, somebody fucked up, but even just seeing this image alone to me is still funny. It's so visually spot on and honestly, to me, nostalgic. I see this image and, of course, I think of Percy's Predicament, and watching it as a kid. It's just funny to see that a similar situation actually occurred in real life. And while I'm not certain, even better to actually have a true story that doesn't involve somebody dying and is, somewhat, from what I can tell, kind-hearted in nature. As I've said before, there's a reason these classic Thomas and Friends episodes last, and why they have lasted. Whether you're young or old, a returning viewer or a new one, no matter who you are, there's something to fall in love with all of these episodes. Perhaps it's the nostalgia from when you were younger and watching these episodes for the first time. Perhaps the accidents and the real-life stories behind them interest you. Or maybe the aesthetic and the storytelling in it just appeals to you. No matter what it is, there's always something that could draw you back into the episode. While this episode didn't have the most information behind it, and let me apologize for that right now, I wish I had more to tell you guys about it, I still appreciate the inspiration that the Reverend W would take from this. Honestly, I feel like the best part of some of these classic stories and original episodes is the inspiration that the Reverend W would take from seemingly anywhere. It's almost like any railroad accident occurrence, he could just turn it into a story. And having these stories rooted in reality is what made them so relatable, and in my opinion, what made Thomas stick out from literally any other kid show that was about trains. Truth be told, I could spend a lifetime whining about the classic Thomas and how much I miss it. And while I hate to admit it, those days are sadly behind us. Trust me, at this rate, it's unlikely that we are getting anything good from Mattel, like ever again. So being able to go back and watch these episodes and find more reasons to fall in love with them and be inspired by them is what makes these Thomas and Friends episodes classics and so special. It really is a callback to a simpler time and to a time we all wish we could go back to. And while unfortunately those days are now behind us, that doesn't mean that these episodes still can't find ways to entertain you now. I'm happy to say that Percy's Predicament is no such exception.